Well, now on BBC One, before this week, an hour of debate with David Dimbleby.
Tonight we're in Northampton, and welcome to Question Time. Welcome to you listening at home, to our audience here, to our panel. The Conservative Party Chairman, Grant Shapps, is here tonight. Labour's Shadow Business Minister, Stella Creasy. The Liberal Democrat MP for Cambridge, Julian Huppert. The Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface, who rose to fame as the anonymous blogger Fleet Street Fox. And a plumber who started with a second-hand van and a bag of tools and has ended up a multimillionaire, Charlie Mullins. Thanks very much, and as ever, you can join the debate by text or Twitter. Remember our hashtag, BBCQT. Follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments to 83981. Use the red button to see what others are saying. Our first question tonight comes from Mike Crussell, please. Mike Crussell.
Will the promise of tax cuts be enough to save the Prime Minister and get a Conservative government elected?
Stella Creasy.
I thought the speech yesterday was really, really interesting, not least because I think we're now seeing that there's going to be a very, very clear choice at the next election for people about the kind of direction of the country. Be under no illusions, there are lots of really, really difficult choices for any political party to deal with, but there is an agreement that the deficit and how we deal with the debt that we have in this country is the top priority for people. What we're seeing, though, is a difference in how you would approach it and a difference in priorities. I have to say I was quite shocked, not least because David Cameron has been so tough with us about the importance of being able to cost out your pledges, to hear the Prime Minister say, right, I'm going to give you a £7 billion tax cut and not clarify where that money's coming from. Because I think the public, when you're dealing with these kind of difficult choices, and there will be difficult choices for all political parties, and us included, you want to see the detail. So to not give the detail, I think, is really, really worrying. And I hope by the time we get to the next election, the detail will be set out. And I mean, look, you know, Grant will say that Labour didn't include talking about the deficit in Ed Miliband's speech the week before, but I tell you, there was an awful lot of detail in there about the kind of spending cuts and the kind of spending pledges that we want to make. I think when the public get to the ballot box in 2015, they're going to be thinking long and hard about actually who is really serious about this, and you just can't pretend to people that you've got an idea without actually the actions behind it, and that's what I saw with the Prime Minister yesterday.
So you mean it's a pig in a poke? He's offering it, but he's not going to deliver, is your view?
Well, we simply can't tell, and I just don't think that's good enough. You know, you're so used to politicians...
is the promise enough to save the
But that's exactly
that's
it, isn't it? You see, if we're honest, people will say to you, politicians, you give with one hand, you take with the other. The only way we can convince you that we're not doing that is by showing you the detail, not just saying to you we want to do this, but actually showing you how it's going to happen. So I can talk you through in detail how Labour would put £2.5 billion into the NHS, where the money is going to come from, what it's going to buy in terms of extra doctors. I just don't think we've seen the Prime Minister do the same on the £7 billion tax cut, and that's really worrying, because what that means is, what is he hiding? Why won't he be honest with us about where the money is going to come from to pay for that?
OK. Grant Shapps, no detail, not enough to make it convincing.
Right, so this was a conference speech in which he set out his vision for the next 5 years, if indeed he is re-elected as Prime Minister. And so the question people will ask, and first of all, we should actually mention what the tax cut was, which was $10,500 up to $12,500 on the tax-free allowance. And for all those people paying higher rate tax, which now traps teachers and police officers, the higher rate tax band, you won't start paying it rather than £41,900, you won't start paying it to £50,000. So everyone will have more money in their pocket as a result of what he pledged. The question is, quite rightly asked...
Just before you go on, everyone, because we asked the Institute for Fiscal Studies, they say it's the top half who get the benefit.
No, well,
because the others are having their tax credits cut at the same time as they're getting the change, and there's hardly any difference.
No. Well, first of all, I mean, if you are somebody on the minimum wage working 30 hours a week, you will not pay any tax at all. Now, there's clearly a tax cut, even taking anything else into account. And actually, because it affects virtually everyone, you have to be earning over $100,000 before it doesn't, it actually would impact on everyone. The important
pay
thing,
your national insurance.
But the important thing is...
You will be giving money to the government. You won't be giving them nothing.
I'm not saying... No one, I think, expects not to have to pay any tax at all. But can I just make the secondary point, which is about whether it's believable, which is the point that Stella was questioning. In this last 4.5 years, we came in, there was a massive all-time deficit in peacetime after the Great Recession. We have halved that deficit, or will have done, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, by next year. We've protected the NHS budget, increased it during that time, and we've cut taxes for people who work hard, so that it was £6,500 before you started paying tax. You can now, as of next April, £10,500. So the question is, will we do it? Well, yes, we've already done that during this Parliament. This is a pledge to say, in the next Parliament, we'll do it again, and we'll set out precisely how in the spending, in the autumn statement, in the budget, and of course in our manifesto.
Okay.
But Grant, you said that you would end the deficit by 2015. Yeah. That was already a promise you made that you haven't kept. How can they be comfortable if you don't tell them where this money is going to come from? But you can do this. It's an uncosted pledge.
What people know is that we have halved the deficit, and that deficit, by the way, was so big that it put us on the same scale in terms of proportion of the economy as Greece, which nearly went bust. Now, we have halved it, you're right, we haven't abolished it, let's face it. Europe, even now, is tinkering back on recession, but we do have the fastest growing economy in the advanced world. The plan is working, so it's right that we now set out what we would do for people in the future. And I'll tell you what, people who've suffered from this great recession deserve to get more of the money they keep and keep it in their own pockets, and that's what this plan would deliver.
Can I suggest that with George Osborne's proposed cuts to in-work benefits, so people that are in work on the lower threshold of pay, so actually, working for the minimum wage, whilst the lower end of the tax cut will be sort of £12,500, it will be a case of taking with one hand and giving back with another, and consequently it will be the poorest people in the society that once again will be paying for these tax cuts.
Let me go to, I'll come back to you. Susie Boniface is nodding in agreement with the lady there.
Well, the best bit of advice I ever had was from a friend of mine once who said that you should judge people not by what they say, but what they actually do. And you need to bear in mind what David Cameron's promised us in the past and what he's done in the past 4.5 years. He said we were all in it together. We've had the bedroom tax, but no mansion tax. He said he would cut the deficit, but not the NHS. The deficit is growing, and the NHS has hit a wall. It's got a £30 billion funding deficit coming up at it. He said he was going to attack waste, and he's attacked the poor and demonised people using food banks. He said he was going to bring in the big society and make people feel more responsible for one another. What we've got is people ducking responsibility and the right to pay their own taxes and leaving the rest of us to struggle and fend for ourselves. He's also promised a cap on immigration. He's promised a right of recall for MPs. He's promised 7-day-a-week GP surgeries, and he promised those things in 2010. He's promised them again this week. Now, if this was a boyfriend, I'm sorry, but it's like someone who is offering to take you to Hawaii next year, but it's just a little bit skint this week, and can you lend him 50 quid? Now, how long does it take before you decide that that boyfriend or girlfriend should be dumped, rather than give him another 5 years and see if it works out next time?
All we've done at the moment is not his suggestions what he's going to do, but he actually says he's going to cut tax for 30 million people. He says he's going to raise the minimum wage. He's also going to find £300 million for apprenticeships. He's going to find 3 million more apprentices positions, and he's also going to try and have youngsters that they don't go on to benefits straight into employment. Now, all these things are great incentives for businesses and for people to get into the workplace. What he's actually trying to do out there is make it more beneficial to go to work and make it more attractive.
Yeah. The woman up there in the second row from the back.
I just wanted to say that my belief is that the Conservatives win the next election no matter what. Because the fact of the matter is that if people think correctly about this, 5 years ago when we went into this government, we were in the most incredible mess. It needed this coalition of Labour and of Liberals and Conservatives to steer the country through that. If we look around the world at what's happened to other countries, not just Greece and Spain, but many, many others as well, and think of us as being the country which has come out absolutely on top, I think we owe a debt of gratitude to everybody that voted Conservative and everybody that voted Liberal, and I think everybody that didn't vote for those two owe a debt of gratitude to those who did.
All right. Julian Huppert, go to the point. Do you believe that the tax cuts will be enough to save the Prime Minister and get a Conservative government elected?
Well, see, I don't want to see a Conservative government elected. I don't want to see a Labour government elected. I think we've seen the problems from both of them.
You're not going to get a Lib Dem one, mate.
Well, it's been a long time, but we're still hoping. So, I think actually the coalition has worked quite well. And what we've seen is the problems that you get from either of them. Now, actually, listening to the speech, some of it I quite liked. I mean, the 12,500 thing was so good, I wish we'd... Hang on, we did say it first, but I'm delighted that the Prime Minister has changed from opposing that, which he did very, very publicly, to now agreeing it, because it does mean that somebody on £12,500 will get to keep an extra £1,200 a year. That is huge for people like that. Now, I had a similar reaction...
Even if you include the cuts that George Osborne announced the day before?
So, what I don't agree with, and I think that half of it was good, half of it is very damaging, and we see what the Conservatives want to do there. It's right to lift poorly paid people up out of tax. That helps people who need the money. But this lady's right. You can't do it by taking the money from people who are also poor. You should take it from people who have money, who are rich, who are doing well. Now, Labour got that right with the mansion tax, which we've argued for ages. Labour opposed it in government. I'm delighted that's changed. But they don't get the need for the fiscal balance that you have to have. So I like a package where you help people who don't have much money, you let them keep more, that's great, and you charge more for people who have lots of money because they can afford to. It's not a punishment, it's because they can help other people.
Yeah, but the gentleman's question was, is that enough, yes or no? And the answer is plainly it's not enough for a new Conservative government to get a majority.
No, I mean, taking good bits of our policies and then having a few other things that would hit the poor is certainly, I hope, not enough to get a Conservative majority government.
The woman up there on the left.
I disagree completely with what that gentleman said about we are indebted to Cameron and Clegg. If you actually, just as an aside thing, if you anagram David Cameron's name, it actually comes up a man divorced. I think Cameron is divorced from power and he will be by the next election.
OK. Do you know that anagram? Does that work?
It's not one I've typed in, no. But, look, I just want to take issue with Susie and also what the lady was saying down here. Not only have we worked very, very hard to protect people who are earning the least, for example, somebody on the minimum wage is already paying 2/3 less tax than they were, we're going to take them out of tax entirely. But also, on the benefit and welfare side, one of the things which has actually already been happening over the last several years, people on benefits are actually already getting a higher increase in their earnings, in their income, than people who are in work. And I just got this to say, you know, people in this country want to have jobs. That's why we should be celebrating the fact there are more people working in this country than ever before. Why we should celebrate the fact that unemployment has been tumbling, and why we shouldn't go back to the bad old days of tax spend and the country going nearly bust.
You need to be honest with the public. The only thing we can confirm out of the Tory party conference is, as this lady says, 2015, the people on the lowest incomes in this country will get a pay cut.
No,
even
no,
the tax
people on the
cuts
lowest,
you're
no,
talking about,
that's not right.
2018 is the earliest they will come, isn't it? And because you can't tell us how you could pay for them,
but hold on.
We can't be confident that you'll deliver them. It was only George Osborne who actually said, we will cut the people on the lowest day's pay. So at least be honest with people. Let's see the choices, because there are difficult choices to be made.
I think one of the differences...
Charlie, it's absolutely right, but there is a choice to be made, and people need the honesty about the detail to be able to make it.
I think one of the differences is we have actually been very straightforward with people. We've actually said in this... Yes, we have, because in this next Parliament...
Are you going to rise VAT to
if you let me answer your point. In this next Parliament, we've said there are still reductions to be made. We know that we've still got to deal with 75 billion worth of deficit. The point is this. We have made sure that people in this society who are earning the least are getting more of that money tax-free, and that absolutely has to be the right thing for society.
So where then is the money for the 7 billion tax? Is it going to come from VAT? Just be straight with us, Grant.
No, we're not. I'll tell you one thing. We're not going to do what you suggested before, which is give with one hand and take away from the other. We have said that we're not going to increase taxes on working people in this country, and we will set out our plan. But you don't have to.
Sorry, does that include not increasing VAT?
Yeah, we've got no. What planning to do? No, that's not the word I was about to say. What we won't do is...
Just be honest, Grant.
You let me answer? I will. If we won't increase taxes on working people in this country, and one of the things I think we've earned the right to do, unlike potentially the previous government, which nearly sent this country to the wall, one of the things we've earned the right to do is say we will protect the NHS, we will reduce the deficit, and we will also make sure that working people keep more of the money. We've done it before. That's what we've done in the last 4.5 years, and we'll do it again.
Do you have to show, though, for people to believe a tax increase, do you have to show now how it can be
a tax reduction? Yes.
A tax reduction?
Yes, we will.
No, now do you have to do it?
Well, we're setting out our plans for the election, and we will, in the autumn statement, and in the budget, and in our manifesto, absolutely show that. And there's no reason not to believe us, because we've done it before.
I believe you, mate, but what I'm saying is it's fairly obvious. Surely the money's going to come by creating the jobs. He's created 1.8 million jobs. People are going to pay tax. The Economist
£7 billion this is going to cost, Charlie. That is a huge sum of money.
Stella,
if it's not going to come from VAT, what services are you going to...
Charlie's absolutely right, and the reason is this. Every single Labour government in history has left unemployment higher than when they went in. And that's why you end up leaving bigger deficits, bigger debts for this country.
OK, I'm going to take a couple more points from the audience, then we're gone. The man there with spectacles on, and then I'll come to the woman who's just been obscured there on the right. Yes, you, sir, first.
Does the panel think that if everybody was paid a living wage, you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about their benefits or in-work benefits being removed? They'd actually get full benefit from the increased tax allowance.
That's your view, is it?
Yes.
You think that? And the woman over there who has her hand up? Yes.
I'm all for tax cuts, and I do agree that the Conservative government and the Lib Dems have done a really good job of turning the country round in this crisis. But the original question was Cameron's chances of winning the next election, and I actually think he would have had a better chance if he'd just gone for increasing the minimum threshold to 12,500, because I think the people on the middle incomes and higher incomes would have actually understood that the main priority is to reduce the deficit and to try and help those
You can't
in
have
lower
tax
incomes.
cuts and say that there's sort of need for austerity.
We're moving
you
on.
can't have both.
We'll go on, because we've had a quarter of our time already. Angèle Taku, please. Can we have a question from you?
Why do Tory MPs keep defecting to UKIP?
I think that's one for you, Grant Shapps.
I thought you might
know the answer.
I thought you might think that. Well, look, first of all, I don't think it makes any sense in as much as when you go to UKIP, if you care about Europe, you've just made it less likely to get a referendum on Europe.
The question was, why do they keep defecting?
Well,
you telling them why they shouldn't have defected.
Well, you have to ask them, and if you do...
Oh, you don't have a view on why they've gone?
I'll tell you. If you ask them, and Mr Reckless told us why he had defected, he said because he wanted to lower taxes. Well, we just had a long conversation about how that is our plan, because he wanted to control immigration from Europe, for which, of course, you've got to have the third thing that he said, which is an in-out referendum on Europe. There's only one way to get to an in-out referendum on Europe. We have to have a vote for it in Parliament. And what is really, I think, a pity about the UKIP Farage kind of patter is what they don't explain to people, and I have this conversation on the doorstep time again, is there is no way to get a referendum on Europe unless Parliament itself votes for it. But the only way to get to that point is to vote for a party which is going to give you that referendum, and only the Conservative Party.
Julian Huppert, why do they leave the Tory party and go to UKIP, in your view? Because Grant's not going to tell us. He just tells us he just says they shouldn't have done.
They should. I mean, it's nonsensical. It makes no sense. It's against their own objectives.
Let me come back to that. But firstly, I mean, Grant always says that you have to have Conservatives to have this referendum. Of course, we've actually passed a law.
It was in your manifesto. You overturned it.
And we've passed a law, the European Union Act, which says there has to be a referendum any time there's a transfer of power. We've actually passed the law already. Parliament said there will be a referendum, and it should be an in-out referendum when there is a change. You don't have to have another one in order to make that law work. But to answer the question, David, I think the problem is that the Conservative Party is desperately split. It has been split since Maastricht. They have a huge problem. Cameron has done quite a good job in trying to corral the sort of extreme Eurosceptics together with the more pragmatic, pro-business Conservatives. It's a huge wing, and they've struggled. And under the pressure, partly of being in government, partly on being in a coalition government, it's fragmenting. He's made promises to the right of his party, he's made promises to the left of his party, and they're getting fed up. And I'm not surprised. I mean, Doug Carswell and Mark Reckless are interesting cases, and I can see the desperation. You know, if you look, you know, Mark Reckless, I've worked with him, I don't agree with him on lots of things, I'm completely opposed to UKIP in many ways. But the way that the Conservative Party are now personally assaulting him, I mean, I realise you have to terrify other people not from leaving, but it's really sad to see a party split up like that.
Is the relationship between the Liberal Democrats and the Tories becoming rather rackety as the election gets closer? Because you're sounding always at each other's throats these days, aren't you? There's not much love left.
Well, I think it's the Conservatives who are tearing themselves apart rather more, but we have always been very, very different. And like all sorts of relationships, you work with people you don't agree with. Okay. Grant and I don't agree on everything, we agree on some things. Stella and I agree on some things, we disagree on other things. That's a normal human thing, we're all like that.
Why do you think they're leaving?
I'm Susie.
No.
The answer to the question, Angelo, is because they're covering their own backs and they know they're going to lose and they want to go with someone who's got a chance of winning. The MPs that have defected are in seaside resorts that are more likely to have high immigrant populations and are more likely to have blue-collar workers who are more likely to vote UKIP. Also, both Doug Carswell and Mark Reckless have cooperated with UKIP previously in previous elections, so it's their areas where they're already quite strong, and they've decided for their own reasons, whatever they might be, that if they want to stay in Parliament and earn a lovely £74,000 a year next year for 26 weeks' work in Westminster, that they need to switch to UKIP. The problem with that is going to be that although in the European elections UKIP was the biggest party, had 27% of the vote, it was a really low turnout. Overall, they only had about 9% of the total potential vote. When it comes to general elections, I think that people take that more seriously and in a different way than the Europeans. So whether or not, when it comes down to the polling booths on general election day, people are prepared to put a vote in UKIP's box and have the possibility that Nigel Farage could be Deputy Prime Minister one day, like Nick Clegg is, running the country when the Prime Minister's on holiday, perhaps spending every lunchtime in the pub and goosing Angela Merkel when there's a summit, I think, I wouldn't put it past him, I think that they're going to have a different decision than they did in the European elections. So people are going to defect to UKIP to cover their own backs, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily going to work out for them.
Who are UKIP going to damage at the general election most, in your view?
Probably everybody, I should
Everybody
think.
will be in
tears. They're probably going to knock the Lib Dems into fourth place, and the Lib Dems will be in the wastelands for a while. They're taking 4 times as many defectors in terms of vote from the Conservatives than they are the Labour Party, but they're also appealing to the core old Labour vote of people who feel that they're not being respected properly within the Labour Party with their policies. I think they're going to damage everybody, but I think the long-term effect is going to be that people kind of are getting switched off from politics. There's low turnouts, and that means that fringe parties with single issues, like UKIP have been up till now, get far more kind of attention and notice than they would do otherwise.
Right, person in the middle there, the second row from the back, that's you, yes?
I think you're being very disingenuous, and also, as usual with speakers and politicians, you denigrate UKIP. Now, with that, you're not having a go at Nigel Farage, and you're not having a go at the party per se. You're having a go at all the people who consider where they put their cross, have voted for UKIP.
Now, I don't mean to denigrate them at all. I think the European elections are a different issue for people.
You just said that those two people, Carswell and Reckless, have actually want to prolong their life and get their 74th. What has that got to do with it? So does Grant Shapps. So does the guy on the end. Sorry, Julian, I've forgotten.
I think that was the answer to Ange's original question, that's the reason why they've defected.
Have they told you that? You know that for a fact?
It's my opinion.
Ah, it's your opinion, then it's not the reason they... No, your opinion is that's the reason they defected. It's not possibly the reason they defected. And if you have to say that, you have to say it's your opinion. Allegedly.
What's your view?
What's my view why they defected?
Yeah.
My view why they defected, they've obviously weighed up the pros and cons because they were still getting the same salaries, sitting on the same, in the same parliament. But what I would say is, why can't Cameron hold on and convince his own MPs that are sitting there, that are not fighting anything at the moment? Why does he not keep them there? You know, we've got another leader who is almost invisible, who's been airbrushed out. Sorry, Julian. And we've got the third one who can't even put together a proper speech and remember everything that's really pertinent. So how do we get there?
Stella Creasy.
It would be easy to intrude on Grant's public pain because we know that a quarter of UKIP candidates were formerly Tory members and Tory activists. So we know that there is a link. But I actually think the lady in the middle, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, you strike a deeper truth there, which is that all of us in the political parties have to recognise what's happening with UKIP and respect the fact that people are thinking about voting for them and ask what message is that trying to send. Because where I do agree with Susie, I think people quite enjoy watching Nigel Farage playing around on a golf course. They'd be horrified if they saw him walking up to number 10. So what is the message that people are trying to give us about the way they feel about politics, the way they feel about the traditional political parties, about the role that we play in their lives? What I know from my own community is that people aren't satisfied with anger, and what I see Nigel Farage offering is anger and blame. They need action, they need answers. As I said at the start, there aren't any easy choices to come at the next general election. You need some honesty and some detail from all of us about how we're going to take the country forward. And it's that process of respect and trust that we've got to rebuild with people. I think we all have to be honest enough that what UKIP represent for a lot of people is a way of expressing that frustration. And rather than, as you say, denigrating people thinking they want to vote with them, understand why and be able to put our case in a more effective way, and that's what we've got to do at the next election.
There's your case, but you have just done it yourself again, denigrating people who have considered what they're doing and still put their cross for UKIP.
I'm really sorry if you feel I'm doing
that.
Actually, I genuinely want to understand where people are coming from. But when I talk to people who say they're going to vote UKIP, what comes across is a sense of frustration with the traditional political process. I think, frankly, all of us in political parties share that. We want a different relationship with the public. We want to have a different relationship, not just because it's about voting, but because it's how we change things.
You've got a by-election in a Labour-held seat, a formerly Labour-held seat, next week, just like the one in Clacton, which UKIP are hoping to take. Tomorrow's Sun has a poll saying that UKIP's vote is up tenfold from the general election. Does that alarm you? Does it ring alarm bells for Labour? Because there's a lot of talk about the damage UKIP does to the Conservative Party.
Sure.
What about the damage it might do to Labour?
You'll need to ask me this next week, because I'm going up there myself next week to talk to people and get a sense of what's happening on the ground.
But do you get a sense already that people are switching from Labour to UKIP?
Look, I don't know. I'm not going to say to you yes or no. What I'm going to say to you is it's right that we go and we listen and we ask, look, you know, UKIP want to do things like make you charge to go to see your GP. I want to have the conversation with people, like I say, about why we need to invest in getting more GPs to get more GP appointments.
You think it is
There are choices to be made, and UKIP represent a choice as much as the Conservative Party.
I mean, when I was door knocking in Eastleigh for the by-election there, it was very, very clear that a huge amount of the UKIP support came from the areas which had Labour councillors. But there was a really strong drive, people going from Labour areas choosing to vote UKIP. We can speculate about why that might be, but there is a really strong pressure going that way.
All right, let's a couple more people. The hand in the middle there, and then I'll come to you over there on the side. Yes.
I think one of the refreshing things about UKIP is Nigel Farage's ability to answer a question. You know, the man who say it... The man will say what he thinks the answer is, whether he thinks the news is good or not. And I think a lot of people just get sick of listening to politicians waffle and say nothing.
Charlie Mullins,
and argue
do you
amongst
agree with
themselves without answering the question.
I think what I can work out here, people who are voting for this UKIP, you know, and let's not kid anyone, they may well vote for them and they're going to wind up with Labour. I mean, you know, it's going to be an either-or that gets in there. And, you know, you may think that you're going to go to bed with Nigel and wake up with Milband, you know, on this. So that's what it's going to be, you know. I mean, they're not going to win it, and you know, and people are voting for them, and so easily it could just swing over to Labour because of that.
But Charlie, don't you think we have to respect the fact that people are looking at that choice and actually engaging what...
Well, of course.
But also say when we don't know. I don't know what's happening in Haywood and Middleton. I have enough respect for the people of Haywood and Middleton to go and take part in that conversation with them.
But what about the
because
point...
I don't think just disrespecting people who vote UKIP and dismissing it is fair enough.
What about the point that Nigel Farage answers the question and other politicians don't? Do you agree with that?
Can I just... I'll save you, Stella. There's a flip side to this.
Save
I'm just joking. I'm just... look, there's a flip side to this, which is, at the UKIP conference last weekend, they announced they would have a new tax. It was going to be a handbag tax or a wag tax, they called it, or something. And 3 days later, out the blue, Nigel Farage says, no, that's not our policy anymore. It lasted 72 hours in total. The reality is they can promise 3 HS2 lines in the manifesto, scrap it afterwards, make all these claims and pledges, including that we'll get you out of Europe, even though anyone looking at it realises you need 326 votes in Parliament to get out of Europe, even to get a referendum. Then, you know, actually he's making promises that he can't deliver. He's standing on the sidelines. And, of course, it's superficially very, very attractive. It's superficial. No, because it's what we've done in this Parliament. We've
That would be
demonstrated
like promising a £7 billion tax cut without saying where you get the money from.
The woman in the third row there, please.
One of the things that I'm really fed up with when I listen to politicians is the fact they're concentrating on people who already vote and are not concentrating on the great big chunk of the population who don't vote. Maybe if we concentrated on them, UKIP wouldn't be the problem. The problem is those people who don't vote. That's who we need to be concentrating on.
How would you see that being done? What would you like the politicians to do?
I think we need to talk about a new kind of politics where we talk about the truth and accountability, where we actually have people who represent local people. All we're seeing at the moment is politicians who are so detached from the whole of our communities. They don't know what the real world is like. They don't know how it is to live.
Let me just say one thing. Very briefly, because all three of us MPs on this panel, you have surgeries, you meet people every week, you probably actually get to see more of real life as it actually is in the real world than doing many, many other jobs. This myth that somehow every MP is out of touch is just completely untrue.
Okay. Julian Huppert.
And I think there's actually a lot that the woman has said, sorry, I don't know your name, is absolutely right. And there is a huge problem. I haven't checked for the two of you. It's incredibly rare now for MPs to actually represent the areas they grew up in. And there is a huge difference. If you grew up there, you know the area. I grew up in Cambridge, I know the roads, I know the people. Lots of people become professional politicians. They find a seat because they like the idea of being an MP. It is an incredibly different thing. We also, incidentally, there's a real problem with young people not voting. You know, we have to get young people to vote, to care about voting, because they vote about a quarter as much as older people, and that's a huge problem.
I said I'd go to the woman up there at the back. Do you want to come in still?
I was going to say, maybe they're all defecting because they're just as disillusioned, actually, as the rest of us. It beggars belief, professional politicians, and, oh, you're in touch, you're out of touch. You can't live on 74 grand? You can't live on 74 grand. Really?
Like 65, he said.
75, whatever it is. You can't live on that. Because I know people that could live on tiny, tiny amounts of that. Because you have to. So maybe they're defecting because they're as disillusioned and bothered with it as the rest of us. I haven't voted since the last general election. I haven't voted in my local elections or anything. And my mum made us vote. She did the whole women died to get the vote. So I voted. She took me to my first voting poll at 18, and I voted ever since. And I voted Liberal Democrat at the last general election. I have no idea why. No idea.
OK. Right. Thank you very much. We must move on to...
Not failing yours, I'd be hungry and on the streets.
Right.
And it just seems very unfair that you lot can continue walking around pretending that we're all in it together. And it's easy to say, oh, let's pick on the politicians and say they don't have a clue and all that lot. And I'm sure there are some honest, good, decent politicians that do what they're supposed to do. But there are also an awful lot of them that do...
Careful.
Not a lot.
Careful. OK, thank you very much. Let's go on to... We'll go on to another question now. This is from Cheryl Goff, please. Cheryl Goff.
Does the panel think that freedom of movement across EU borders should include convicted criminals?
We had a number of questions about this. We have to be careful about this. This, of course, refers to the hideous murder of Alice Gross. And the person who's being sought, who is a convicted murderer from Latvia, and that's what the question refers to. But he's not been charged, he's just a suspect. But the question is whether there should be freedom of movement, including convicted criminals, across EU borders. Julian Huppert.
There was a catastrophic failure in this case, and he should never have been allowed to come in. There's a computer system that information is supposed to sort out, and for some reason it didn't happen. And I think that is a huge, huge problem. I think what you have to do is to work with other countries so that you know who is going to be dangerous, so that people like this don't come in. That's why you have to be able to talk to them. That's why you should be part of information sharing with all these countries throughout Europe, because otherwise you'll have no idea whether somebody who's coming in as a tourist, as a visitor, what their background is. So that's why it's essential that we're opting in to all of that sharing around Europe, because we have to know who are the people who really shouldn't be coming in. Let's keep them out. But all the people who want to come here to contribute to our society, to have a look round, the way we go and have a look in their countries or go and live in the south of Spain, let's let them in. But keep dangerous people like this out.
But are you saying that somebody who has committed a crime, been in prison for it, served his or her sentence, should nevertheless not be allowed into the UK under EU rules? Surely they are allowed in as much as somebody from one part of England can travel to another part of England or go to France or Germany with a criminal record.
There's a big difference between different types of criminal record. Somebody who has a conviction for shoplifting 20 years ago is very, very different from the sort of thing we're talking about here. You can discriminate between these. We have a system in this country where convictions are spent after a certain amount of time. That's the right thing to do. People who've committed minor offences, what you want to do is to rehabilitate them, help them to get a job so they don't offend again. People who've committed more serious offences, and some of these are, some of the worst offences you can imagine, that's where you need to take action. That's what we have in this country, and we should apply that to people coming as well.
Grant Shapps, do you agree with that? Are we able to do that?
Yeah,
Could this man have been denied entrance to Britain?
Yeah, well, first of all, on the case, without the specific individual, is horrendous, and anyone as a parent or anyone in the audience or watching will be just watching the news coverage is appalling. And of course, we should be able to control our own borders. One of the things within the other EU countries is they don't have the Schengen. They have the Schengen arrangement. That means they have free movement, one country to the other, without borders. We do, fortunately, still have some control over our borders, and I think there's a very strong case for this to be looked at in terms of the seriousness of the crime. It's also, looking forward, one of the reasons why we want to renegotiate with the EU over things like border control, so that we do have more control over our borders, and particularly when new countries join on the wider question of immigration from countries which don't have economies of the same level in the future. So I think this is a very serious subject, and I think that everyone would be sympathetic, or every right-minded person would be sympathetic with the idea of it being looked at.
But are you saying that there is a rule that people who have committed some horrific crime within the EU can be prevented from coming, even though they've served their sentence, can be prevented from coming to the United Kingdom? Because that is not our understanding of what the Home Office says.
No, that's right. I mean, first of all, I should say it's not my area of specialisation, but my understanding is that there are very limited powers at the moment. There, I think, is a case for looking at this, and that's something which this case has highlighted, that we wait to see the outcome of it, naturally. And I also think it flags up why it's so important that we do get that EU in-out referendum after renegotiation, which could also be...
Charlie Mullins.
Yeah, well, obviously we should check everybody that comes in the country. I mean, and, you know, this sad case has just happened, and I feel that could have been avoided if checks were done. There's not enough control in there, and we're letting in every Tom, Dick and Harry. We need to make sure who's coming in. You know, it just happens too many times, so of course we've got to put better control in. And I mean, you know, just on another case, you know, we get trades or so-called tradespersons, you know, they leave Poland and they're like a road sweeper. Time they get to England, they're a plumber. No one's checking them. You know, people need to be checking people that are coming in here, and it would have avoided the situation.
You sit up there.
I understood this guy dropped off of the radar because of austerity cuts in the Latvian probation service due to the, you know, recession. I just wonder if there's a danger that that same kind of mistake is going to happen in this country.
Stella Creasy.
Well, look, like everyone, first and foremost, our hearts go out to the family of the person that we're talking about. I think we need to be very careful in our conversations to remember and respect that. What I would say is one of the things that concerns me sometimes in our conversations about Europe, we talk as if it's always about compromises. One of the benefits of being part of the European Union and being able to look at issues like this are things like the European arrest warrants that allow us, if somebody does travel to another country, to be able to get them back to the UK so that they can be brought to justice. And I have to say one of the things that concerns me about some of the conversations we have about Europe is we don't look at that. And in fact, the government has put at risk some of those provisions that allow us to have a European arrest warrant. So God forbid that this gentleman, if he is being charged with the crime, they're not able to be brought back. You know, it's the same with what Charlie's talking about in terms of people being undercut. Absolutely, we see people being undercut, but there are ways that we can deal with that because we have a national minimum wage in this country. So we have to be really, really careful when we talk about Europe to talk about actually what is it we want to achieve. Do we want to be able to trade with Europe? Do we want to be able to travel within Europe? Do we want to be able to keep our borders safe? Absolutely. I suspect other countries do. It's better when we work with European countries to make sure that happens because it's more likely to happen for all of us.
Susie Boniface.
The thing to bear in mind is that this is a two-way exchange. If we have criminals come in here, we also export some of our own when they've been convicted. We tend to export quite a lot of paedophiles to Vietnam and Cambodia and places like that. Now, I agree with Charlie. I think there should be checks at the border for people coming in and for going out. But as we've seen this week with the case of Yusra Hussain, the 15-year-old girl who seems to have gone to Syria, no one is checking on the way out either. We have some powers now, and we don't exercise them, we don't use them because there's lots of cuts and so on in the border forces. If we do get the powers that Charlie or Grant are talking about, the chances of them actually exercising it and having the money to do that, I think, are pretty slim. I think this is going to be something that happens now and again, and it's a very unusual and strange situation. It's rare for someone to kill in this kind of way if this is what's happened. And it's going to happen now and again. I think, unfortunately, it's life. It's something horrible that we all of us have to put up with.
All right. Let's, yes, Lady Hannah.
I don't know why we can't have a system more like the United States. You can't, I think if you'd skipped a maths lesson in 1983, you're not even allowed on a plane to go to the States. Just why can't we have something stricter like that?
Because we have, within the EU, more liberal arrangements.
But
You'd like to see that, though?
I'd like to see something stricter so
Yes.
we know exactly who's coming in the country and know exactly who's going out.
You, sir.
So, if these are convicted criminals, presumably they've been sentenced. So why aren't we investing in harsher sentences and appropriate rehabilitative sentences so that when people are released, there is no further danger?
Well, this guy was convicted in Latvia. It's up to Latvia to sentence him and to release him when it happened in their probation service. You know, if we had a killer that was released, there'd be a different probation regime for him to be under, I expect.
Yes, briefly.
Can I just respond to the woman near the front about this issue about who's coming into the country, but also who's leaving? Because years back we used to have exit checks, we used to know who left. Those were scrapped at the beginning of the last government. We're now trying to bring them back, and we should bring them back, because you can't have any sort of sensible policy if you don't know who leaves. Absolutely. And that's a huge problem. The Home Secretary is behind schedule with actually getting that sorted. I wish he'd get that done, because we should know who leaves, so we know who's here, and then you can have sensible policies. I'd like to see people who come here and contribute to the country able to get here really easily. Lots and lots of businesses are set up by people who come over from Europe. They contribute hugely to our economy, but we should know who's here.
All right, I'm going to move on to another question because we have 20 minutes or so to go. And this is from Erica Barnes. A question from Erica Barnes, please.
Was the Sunday Mirror's entrapment of Brooks Newmark in the public interest?
This is the minister who resigned because the Sunday Mirror published the story of him sending a photograph of himself, indecent photograph, to somebody who turned out to be a reporter pretending to be a young woman. You probably know the story. Susie Boniface, your view.
What a surprise. I write fairly regularly for the Mirror. I worked for Sunday Mirror for 10 years. I left there 3 years ago and I'm freelance. I work for lots of people now. And what I'm going to say is my personal opinion, although it's informed, obviously, by some of my experience of journalism. I don't think it was entrapment. Entrapment is, when you look at the definition of it, it involves providing somebody with compelling someone to do something wrong that they would not otherwise have done. And the information is, in this particular case, there was a tip about Brooks Newmark, specifically about him, that he had a habit of this sort of thing.
Wait, so hang on a second, let's just get this clear. Entrapment is where you get them to do something that they would
not otherwise have done. And you need to prove that there is a level of compulsion.
Well, hang on. Take the simple and frequently done example of people being done for trading drugs, where an undercover reporter goes and tries to buy heroin or cocaine or something. Is that, and he's supplied, is that something he wouldn't have done? No, it's something he would have done.
It's same with the Cash for Questions sting as well, which was also a newspaper sting, involved someone setting up a
You can't force people into doing things they wouldn't do.
No, but you have to do more. If you're going to defend yourself against a journalist is allowed to provide someone with a simple opportunity. If the person takes that opportunity to do something wrong, it's not entrapment. And also, if they're not likely to have done it in the first place, i.e. have no history of, then again, it can be argued that it is entrapment. I think in this particular case that it's not entrapment because Mr. Newmark, if you read the original article, responded to this journalist, which he thought was a young woman online, by firstly offering his mobile phone number, secondly going into private messages, and then on 7 occasions seeking explicit photographs from her, and another 3 occasions asking to meet her. Now, that doesn't sound to me like someone who was reluctant or who needed persuading. It sounded to me like someone who was quite enthusiastic with the opportunity to misbehave, and who grabbed it with one hand while lowering his pyjama trousers with the other one. As far as the public interest is concerned, public interest is a really difficult thing to define, and if there is 100 people in this room, there would be 100 different definitions of public interest. That's what IPSO, the press regulator, is for, to try and decide. This particular story would probably come under something, a clause that says impropriety. And I think there are 2 issues that would make this a public interest. One of those is one of the messages that Brooks Newmark sent, which said, I will send you a picture if you send me one, and that way we both have a secret. Now, if that were you and me, it doesn't matter to say that kind of thing. In a government minister who has security clearance, that's an invitation to blackmail and to corruption. And that, under the Ministerial Code of Conduct, that alone would be a reason to resign. Regardless of what you think about sexting or affairs or anything else, that's a reason to resign. And the second one is that the really dark and nasty nub of this story is that a man with power and wealth and influence repeatedly, not once or twice, not idly, but repeatedly sought explicit photographs from what he thought was a young woman who had no power or wealth or influence, and if she had been the young junior activist that he thought she was, that he would have had the power to influence her career for better or worse. To me, personally, I think that smells like a little bit like exploitation, and it's certainly abuse of power. I would prefer it if people who abuse their power for sexual gratification were not running the country.
Well, do you want to pick it up? Charlie, you do it. Okay.
Susan, I totally agree with you. What he done was totally incorrect. He held his hands up, he admitted what he's done, he resigned. Now, surely it's a matter to deal with his wife on a personal basis. You know, surely, you know, the man was set up by the journalist, and surely we should be looking at people that are drawing people into these traps and creating these situations.
No, that's the whole point. It wasn't entrapment, that's my point.
It was.
A journalist is given information, say that Charlie Mullins is used to picking up wallets from the floor in pubs, right? And so, no, you're not, but say a journalist is given information. The only way that I can see if that's true is firstly to be the kind of person who drops a wallet on a pub in the floor in front of you and see if you do it. Well, or have someone tell me that you picked up their wallet.
But aren't the papers saying that they tried this trick on with 100 MPs?
No, they didn't. That's the issue.
Well, how comes then only two papers want to run the story? I mean, you know, the man's admittedly made a mistake. He's been a fool, and he's lost his job over it. But surely it's a personal situation with his wife now.
Yes, I think you're right. He's resigned, and he's probably done that in order to try and kill the scandal as quickly as possible. And this is making it worse. I'm sure he's sitting at home saying, "Shut up."
Grant Shapps, do you think it was entrapment?
You know what? I don't think it even matters whether it was or wasn't, and the new press regulator, IPSO, will be the people to decide. Was it wrong, though? Of course it was. And, you know, he's done the only thing he could have possibly do, which is resign and call himself a fool, which he was.
Why doesn't it matter whether he was trapped or not?
Well, it does matter, but there's a body that will decide whether that is technically
entrapment. But you don't have a view yourself.
Well, it's a legal question, isn't it?
Do you have a view?
No, I don't know whether that's entrapment or not. They think they went after about half a dozen MPs.
No, they didn't go after. There was... they were
trying to...
The information was about
Weir.
one particular person, and in order to set up a Twitter profile that would be believable as a Tory party activist, the freelance reporter in question followed a number of Tory party MPs, a lot of whom were women, a lot of whom included the Prime Minister, and they were not targeted, and that was not the initial information. But if so, we'll have the emails and memos from the journalists to see if
they'll work it out.
the
Either way, it was an extraordinary thing to do, and I don't know what's happened to the sale of Paisley pyjamas since, but I imagine it's been affected one way or the other.
Absurd.
Stella Creasy.
Well, I mean, I do think Charlie's right to point out that 2 newspapers did turn down this story because they felt...
newspapers, neither conference, of course they did.
Well, but they all felt that it was a step too far. I think that's exactly why you're right, Susie, that IPSO should be the ones looking at this. I have to say I'm a little bit wary, given that there were quite a lot of MPs as part of that process, and some of the messages, I read some of the messages, they were very surreal. I mean, that is not how women speak, frankly, that were being sent to the MPs. So it did read as a very strange story.
What is not how women speak?
If you read some of the messages that the journalist in question was sending to MPs, to male MPs, about being hot, hot, hot and this sort of thing, it was very
Does
surreal.
that not make you think that he must be extra vain and stupid and reckless to have accepted that?
It just makes me think, above all, that's the reason why we have Ipsos, is that for them to decide these kind of questions rather than for us to do it on the back of it. You know, they're the ones who need to look and say, actually, why did some press people go, no, this isn't the right kind of way of approaching this, not in the public
Julian
interest.
Huppert.
I mean, I haven't looked at all of the sort of tweets and so forth in enough detail to be able to assure whether it's entrapment. I feel slightly sorry for the Conservative press officer who had presumably to say to the Prime Minister, you know, I've got bad news and good news. You know, the bad news is one of your MPs has resigned and defected, but the good news is it won't be the top story for very long. But there is an aspect which also troubles me, which is about the images that were sent to Brooks of the person who it claims to be. Because these were images of some poor woman, I have no idea who it is. Several women. That's right. That were sent out without any of her consent. And in this case, you know, I'm sure journalists will claim there was a reason, but there is a real epidemic of this. There are lots of cases, particularly of revenge porn, where people take images of exes and they put them out there just to humiliate and destroy ex-partners. It happens a lot. There have been cases of suicide, people losing their jobs. It's an incredibly shaming thing to have those sorts of photos there. So I think this should be looked at. We're actually trying to, at the moment, make that illegal. I've been talking about this in Parliament. I hope we'll have support from all the parties to do this. Because, shockingly, you can take these photos, taken with consent, then after the relationship's over, you can put them out online, and if you only do it once, it's legal. You know, that clearly cannot be right. We have to change that.
This wasn't about revenge porn. There was this is a copyright breach, and everyone's apologised for it, and the Mirror didn't publish the photographs.
All right, we have 10 minutes or so left. Let's move on to another question. From Alistair Jepson, please. Mr. Jepson.
Where does the Prime Minister expect to find an estimated 5,000 GPs necessary to staff 7-day GP access?
Prime Minister saying that he's going to have 7-day access to surgeries and an estimate. You yourself are in the NHS?
That's correct. And it takes 10 years to train someone from the start of medical school to become a GP. And if that promise is by 2020, it mathematically doesn't work.
So you think it was
a... And you can't beg and borrow doctors from elsewhere because there are no other spare capacity.
So you think it was a promise that he can't fulfil?
I do, yes.
Stella, Creasy?
Look, I think you're right to flag this up because this was a promise they also made in 2010 and it's not happened. When I spoke at the start, I said, look, we've made a commitment to put £2.5 billion into the NHS. Part of that is to fund an increase in the numbers of staff to increase the capacity.
But you're promising 8,000, not 5,000 GPs, but 8,000.
Part of that is about,
they take 10 years.
because one of the points is about whether there's the funding to do the training and the capacity and also to bring people in to be able to deliver on that promise. Why does it matter? I've had a gentleman in my community go blind in one eye because he couldn't get a doctor's appointment because this government scrapped the extended hours that actually was making it possible for people to go to doctors in time. I see people all the time ending up at my local hospital, which is packed capacity in A&E, because we haven't got that capacity in the system. So it's going to make a big, big difference to bring more doctors in, but that is going to cost money. So the public need to get where the money is coming from, and that's why I'm saying it's important that you look at the detail. When politicians of all political parties tell you that they care about the NHS, actually what are they going to do to make it work in the future? Because we've got some really high-quality problems in this country, namely we're all living longer. That means we need a different type of healthcare. That needs money, it needs investments, it needs these kind of doctors, but you're right to be sceptical about where is that going to happen without the additional funding, without the reconfiguration.
Right. So he shouldn't be sceptical about your claim you're going to have 8,000 GPs, but he should be sceptical
if you want,
about the Tory proposal for 5,000. Grant Shapps.
If you want to know where the money comes from.
Grant Shapps. Answer the point that Labour has costed this and says they found the money, and she says you haven't.
Well, we have because we've been expanding the NHS budget, which is something which has enabled us to ensure that we already have 1,000 more GPs than we had at the last election. This is a big new promise. You're absolutely right to do 5,000, but we have funded it, and we say that we're working with the Royal College of GPs, British Medical Association and others to deliver it. It is a big ask, but there are people already in the system who are already training, who are already at medical school, so that we see the flow is there to make it happen. And I think it's essential.
Let Mr. Shapps come in on this straight away. Yes,
they're going to fill the positions that already people retiring. Yeah. So it needs to be a new cohort of people coming through. And general practice is going to become undesirable if you're working 7 days, working nights. People aren't necessarily going to want to do general practice. You can't convince them they have to be a GP from day one.
No, I understand that, and I understand that it's going to be take a lot of time and energy to do it, but most people in this country feel that we should go back to having a named GP. Most people feel it's wrong that we lost the ability to call up a GP at night and know that it's your own GP coming. And most people do want in this society now a GP 7 days a week, 8 till 8. And that is the commitment that we're going to make sure that happens.
Well, the question was when, and the answer is never. Because he's promised this in 2010, and he's promised it again this week, and he hasn't managed to produce it in the last 4.5 years. It doesn't matter how much money you put into the system, you can't, as you've said, you can't convince someone to do something that they don't necessarily want to do.
So do you believe Labour is just as wrong to promise 8,000 GPs?
Yeah, I don't think anyone can promise, because the current GP system is such that there are 543, I think it was said this week, practice surgeries where 90% of their doctors are over 60 and they're coming to retirement, they're in danger of closing. It's already 2 weeks to see a GP. And there's lots of things we'd all like, as Grant said, there's things people would like a named GP and they would like to see them in the evenings and at the weekends. But unless there are GPs in the system coming up and coming through in their recruitment, this is part of the reason that midwives are striking. The raw material's not there.
The woman there, and then I'll come to you here. Yes.
It's my understanding that the newly qualified doctors are rushing to work abroad so they don't have to pay back their fees.
All right. And you?
I'd just like to know why the Prime Minister continues to promise things that are not deliverable, and actually they're just not deliverable. I work in house service, they're not deliverable, and wouldn't that money that's going to be spent on increasing access to GPs be better spent somewhere else, because we don't know how much it's going to cost, and the whole thing just appears to be a vote catcher.
You mean
it's not deliverable.
Do you agree with the gentleman who asked the question, the surgeon, that that people actually don't want to become GPs? Is that the because you work in the NHS, you say it's not going to happen, however much money is thrown at it?
I don't know that they don't want to become GPs. I think the system to train doctors can be very difficult, to get access into courses, the actual support through the course, and the course being very difficult and hard and intense, you know, can put people
So
off.
everybody makes promises about the NHS, but you're saying the reality is not that
It's not
simple.
deliverable.
Julian Huppert, do you agree with that?
I mean, it is a very difficult thing. I mean, we have this wonderful problem, as Stella was saying, that people are living longer. And if you look back when the NHS was set up, in all the debates, people said it would get cheaper each year to have the NHS because people would be healthier. Now, that's not what's happened. We can treat things that we could never do, but that costs a lot of money. So there is this huge, huge problem about how you deal with it. I'm sceptical of any of these really, really big numbers. We have, in the last 4 and a bit years, got 6,500 more doctors. So we can probably continue at about that sort of rate, but that's not going to catch up with either of those figures. I think there are things we should look at more. I mean, in my part of the world, in Cambridgeshire, our biggest problem for funding the NHS is the PFI contracts that suck huge amounts of money. We have 2 big hospitals where these incredible PFI contracts, and that's why we can't spend the money that we need to spend on mental health care, that's why we can't spend the money we need to spend on older people, on community services, on anything else.
Set up under Labour or the Conservatives?
Set up under Labour, and actually we also have the biggest privatisation ever of Hinchingbrook Hospital, which was a tender that was issued by Labour, and just this week we've had the second biggest, which I'm delighted to say went to the NHS.
But
Labour the hospital and mental health trust.
Julian, you voted for this health and social care.
No, I didn't.
Your party has let this government massively disintegrate. So one of the problems I see at a local level is I can't hold anyone accountable for that poor gentleman who went blind in one eye, because whether it's NHS England or my local hospital or the practice, nobody's listening to the patients. But fundamentally, we've got to pay doctors, and that's what this money will deliver. That's how we can get more doctors in the system. But you supported your party, it may not have been you, Julian, but your party has supported the fragmentation of the NHS, which is causing huge problems.
But you
for people at a local level.
you support your shadow health
we are
minister
going to repeal the Health and Social Care Act.
That big private.
We are going to repeal the Health and Social Care Act, because you can see the problems firsthand. You can see where money isn't going right into the system, and that is why people make a difference.
I know Labour keeps saying this, but when Labour were in government, they massively fragmented with all the trusts. They increased the amount of money that was brought in by the NHS, private companies and others providing it. In 1997, it was just over £1 billion a year. By 2010, it was £7.5 billion.
Are you telling me that privatisation, what this government has been doing to our local NHS services, it's decimating?
I don't agree with it when Labour do it. I don't agree with it when Conservatives do it. I want the NHS to be good.
Charlie Mullins.
Charlie Mullins. In his latest speech, he says that he's making no more cuts in the NHS, yeah? He says he's going to turn it into a 7-day sort of week business. He's very passionate about the NHS. He probably uses it more than most people have used it in the situation, unfortunately, he's had with his children. I mean, when he was saying his speech the other day and the promises he's made and the passion that was coming out, I honestly believe he will do something. It obviously needs improving, and I believe we should give him a chance.
OK. We have to stop. Our time's up, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, we'll be overrunning just as we get into that argument. But next week, we'll be back again. Next week, we're going to be in Clacton for that by-election where UKIP are hoping to win the first seat at Westminster. We're not going on until the polls are closed, so we should be able to talk about it freely. We've got Labour's Deputy Leader Harriet Harman there, the novelist Jeanette Winterson. The week after that, we're going to be in Newbury in Berkshire. So if you'd like to come either to Clacton or Newbury, go to our website. The address is on the screen, or call 0330 123 9988. If you've been listening to this on BBC Radio 5 Live, you can continue the debate, as ever, on Question Time, Extra Time. My thanks to our panel here, to all of you who came to Northampton to take part. Until next Thursday from Question Time. Good night.
Working age benefits, should they be frozen? Plus a look back at the Conservative Party conference and the politics of sex. An eclectic mix next on BBC One with This Week.
The politicians, pundits and suits of all